Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I want to have a bit of a discussion about, first of all, the knives that I've been carrying the most over the last few months. I guess this will be like most carried spring of 2021. However, what I realized as I was going through this list that every knife on the list, or most of the knives on the list, has like one little thing that I'm not totally in love with. So I want to actually roll in a discussion simultaneous to sharing these awesome knives with you guys about how you can still love a knife and enjoy it and carry it and use it and feel no inclination to get rid of it whatsoever. Uh, because even though it has like one little thing that you wish were different. So let's go ahead and start working our way through these. We're going to do it one by one. So let me get these out of the way. You can see there's a lot of knives here and there'll be a little bit of commentary on each one. So this is probably going to be on the longer side of, my videos. So get a cup of coffee, sit down, relax. Let's start off with this Civivi Dogma. Now, there are a number of variations of the Civivi Dogma available. This is the one I happen to have. It's the layered carbon fiber G10 with the blackened Damascus blade. And you're seeing right now the one issue that I'm not in love with. I like Civivi's Damascus. I prefer, if I'm going to do a fancy like Damascus blade or something like that, I prefer it on something a little cheaper like a Civivi. But in this case, I wish that it wasn't the blackened Damascus. I wish it was just standard Damascus. And that way, I feel like the blade, one, I wouldn't have to kind of do this and get just the right angle to show you guys the pattern. And even, I can tell you in person, it's a little easier to see, but in person, it's still oftentimes, the detail of the pattern kind of washes out in certain light. And I wish it didn't do that. And I think if it was just regular Damascus without the black wash over it, it would pop a little more. And I actually think it would also tie the knife together a little more. This knife is, fairly dark overall, but there's a little bit of silver that shows through in the carbon fiber. And I think the silver would kind of pick up the silver in the blade and tie together nicely. I still love this knife. I still carry it. I still use it. Absolute gem of a knife. I cannot possibly recommend the Civivi Dogma to you enough. It is probably at this point my favorite budget knife. I really, really like this. And yet it has this one thing that I'm just not totally in love with. All right, let's carry on. The next knife I have for you here is another absolute winner, one of the most perfect EDC knives you could possibly imagine. However, again, there's one small hiccup with this knife. I love this knife. I love the colors. I love the layered G10. I love the way it feels in hand. I love the action. I love the blade shape, blade grind, everything except this black coating. I hate knives that have a black coating because I know at some point, now it hasn't happened yet, but it will. I'm just sure that it will, and I'm probably jinxing myself by saying this, but I'm going to go cutting something and I'm going to hit a staple or I'm going to hit something hard and it's going to scrape this coating and then it's going to have this constant mark forever. Where on a satin finished blade, if I do put a little scrape on it, it's just a little line that kind of matches with all the other lines that are already included in the satin finish. And so I don't like black coated blades. This one still has the black coated blade, and I know that's a bit of a theme for right now, but that's not the main theme of the video. But the theme is, here's a knife I love. I love the size. I love so many things about this knife. I just wish the blade were a different color. Well, didn't have the black coating on it. And guess what? Even with the black coating, I still adore it. I don't plan to get rid of it. It's totally, totally fantastic. Let's move on here to another knife that you guys know is a favorite. This is, of course, the Chris Reeve knives in Cosi. And I really, really like this knife. I carry it all the time. I feel like a broken record saying, let's just say all the knives on the table, all the knives that I'm going to show you are knives that I really, really like and really, really enjoy. Okay. So I don't have to say it over and over again. So here's one of those knives, but this knife has one problem, and it's well attested, and I have the same issue, and that is the thumb stud. It's not the worst thing ever, and you can see I can open the knife no problem, and it's not that I have a real issue with it, but I just wish it were a little more comfortable. It's not the end of the world, as I say, and I still adore this knife. It's one of my favorite knives of all time, yet I would change that thumb stud if I could. All right, next up on the list is a knife that's been compared to, you're already seeing a little bit of the issue here, a knife that's been compared to the Sebenza a little bit, although I don't think, from the standpoint of it's kind of a simple thing done pretty well, that comparison I sort of get. But this is the Monterey Bay Knives Old Guard. It's a Ray Laconico design. It's pretty well put together by Monterey Bay Knives, and I adore this knife. I love Ray Laconico's designs, and this is a great expression of it. However, this knife has one issue, and that is it's better than it was, but it's still got a very stiff detent. It's not the end of the world. Again, I can deploy the knife. It used to be worse than this. In fact, when I got this knife, it had such a stiff detent that it would, like, after 2 or 3 flicks, your thumb was getting sore. This, since that time, I have made some minor changes. I took the knife apart and I just polished the edges of the detent hole. And actually there was a little burr all the way around that detent hole that was really catching on the detent ball and making it almost impossible to deploy. Cleaned it up and now it works a lot better. The other complaint I would have is, the raindrop carbon fiber, it's fine, but I don't love it. I would have rather had, maybe micarta or a couple of other things here. But that said, in person, I do like the rainbow micarta. I don't mind it at all. It makes something a little bit different about the knife. But the real issue here is that super stiff detent. And I've improved it quite a bit, and I'm happy with it now. But it's still pretty stiff, and yet, because of the design, just the cleanness and the simplicity of it, because of the utility of this blade grind, of the comfort of this handle, I really, really enjoy this knife, and I'm happy to overlook a slightly stiffer detent than I would want because I like everything else about this so much. All right, let's grab another knife. This is a knife that's loved by many people, not just me. Spyderco Paramilita 2. The problem I have with this knife, I love the action. I love many, many things about it. I just wish that the blade to handle ratio were better. This is essentially a large knife with the blade of a small knife, okay? And it's not super, super small, but the blade to handle ratio really is not great. I know a lot of people also complain about the location of the lanyard hole. That's not something I really care about. I think, this goes into my pocket fine the way it is. But the blade is just a little short, and I would have loved to see a longer blade on this particular knife. All right, now let me get out a knife that's well known by you guys to be an absolute favorite of mine, and that is the Cold Steel 8010. This thing is a dream come true. It is, if I had to get rid of everything, I would be hard pressed to get rid of the 8010. That might be the knife that I would keep. I know we've gone through this before and it changes a little bit over time, but there is one hiccup about this knife. It feels great in hand. It cuts really well. It's fantastic to use. So all of those things are phenomenal and I totally enjoy them about this knife. However, this knife is quite thick and I don't know what it is, if it's the placement of the clip. Well, the clip I don't like either, but when you have this in your pocket, I don't know if it's just the way, the location that it finds itself on my leg most of the time, but I find this is a knife that I notice in my pocket, partially because of the thickness, I think, maybe because of the contouring, I don't know, but I notice this in my pocket a lot more than some of my other knives, even knives that are just as big, just as thick, just as bulky. There's something about the shape of this knife that it seems to be noticeable in my pocket, and so I don't love it for that reason. All right, here is a knife that kind of belongs on this list and kind of doesn't. I love this knife as it sits here right now. However, I've made some changes to it. I've changed the clip, I've changed the scales. Sharp Dressed Knives did a wonderful job with this knife. And this is, this is one of those knives, I would call this I would call more of an alternative to the Sebenza perhaps than the Old Guard. But beautiful, fantastic. Everything about this knife is great. Some people have complained about the liner lock, and that's not my complaint. I don't mind the way this liner works. I don't have any problem getting hold of it at all. But in its normal configuration, Something about the way that carbon fiber looks and feels just puts me off. I don't really enjoy it. So for me, this is a knife that it's got that one little issue. Now I fixed it on mine, but I still think it's a great knife. And I bought it, I owned it, and I bought it, I own it. Don't plan to get rid of it, but it does have one little thing that I'm not in love with. Next up, I know, what could you possibly say bad about this knife, Kevin? I've got some gunk on it, so that's one thing. But this is, of course, the S90V Spyderco Native Chief Sprint Run. I always want to call it the Spidey Chef. It's just too close. So Native Chief Sprint Run. And I really, really like this knife. You guys know I like larger knives, and this one is big and comfortable and fantastic. The carbon fiber looks beautiful, really, really nicely done. Everything about this knife I enjoy, except the blade. I mean, it cuts really well, but I consider this, generally I think of a larger knife as being a little more heavy duty, a little more utilitarian, but this is a large knife with a fairly thin, delicate blade on it. And so I don't, this is not a knife I would take to the bush. This is not a knife I would consider sort of a heavy duty utility type of knife. It's a fairly light use type of knife, unless you're going to be very, very careful with it. And so, while I love many, many things about this, and I enjoy carrying it. By the way, this came from Southern Edge Knife Works. Go check those guys out. I will put a link in the description, or I'm not sure which link. Don't quote me on that one. But this is from Southern Edge Knife Works. You can go over there, save yourself 15% off. That's really, really cool. And I'm a huge, they've done a lot to support the channel. So I really, really, have to give them credit. But it's just a little thin. So I only carry this on certain occasions. It kind of puts it in the occasional carry category for me instead of the full EDC category. Next on the list, the Steel Will Apostate, another knife that I really, really like. And this is a weird knife, guys, because I have to say, first of all, especially in the green with the black, I don't find this to be a super attractive knife. Now, I like the black and satin a little bit more. Beggars can't be choosers. Steel Will did send me this knife. And, well, they sent it to me, and I'm really, really grateful that they did, because it turns out this thing is way better than I initially thought. So really, the thing that puts me off a little bit is the looks. I don't love the look of this knife in this configuration. Maybe for you, and if you're out there and you've got a satin and black, but you would love the green, I mean, if you've got a satin with black G10 and you'd like to trade me, get in touch, because maybe we can make that happen. But this knife, the action is phenomenal. The feel in hand is phenomenal. The blade geometry, this is a pretty tough, durable blade, thick blade stock, but it's quite thin behind the edge. And it turns out that when you start cutting with this blade, it works so well, even though it kind of doesn't look like it should. It is really, really great. Not only that, but some features, it's got the thick, heavy duty stop pins out here. This is a very robust, very tactical, hard use type of knife. And it performs amazingly well. And because of that, I carry this quite a bit, but I really don't love the look of it. So I love this knife. I just don't find it as pretty as some of the other knives in my collection. All right, let's keep going here. We've got a few other things to cover. I've got some fixed blades. This is the Pmp Bulldog. And this is another knife. This is a knife that actually, it's one of the few knives that is designed to be sort of a minimalist knife that I don't feel the need to wrap. All right, the way the ergonomics are on this are actually quite good, and that's largely because of the very thick blade stock it's using. The thing I don't love about it is it's set up to be carried as a neck knife. I wish they would ship this with a clip, especially wish they would ship it with sort of a tape measure clip. So, if you've got a construction tape measure, it's just got that spring clip on it that you can easily clip to your tool belt or your pant leg, or your waistband or your pant pocket or whatever. I would love to see a clip like that right here on this knife that I could just clip it to my belt. Otherwise, so I have been carrying this and using it and doing some testing for review purposes. I've also got some other knives in recently that I'm going to compare it to. And so, yeah, I like this knife a lot. I love the design of it. talked about that in the first impressions. I love the satin finish, but that one little hiccup, what I've been doing is often just dropping this in my pocket just like that. And it works fine, but it's not ideal. And so I love this knife, but it just has that one thing. Okay, next, the Spyderco Amalgam, another knife. This has been in my pocket so much. Remember, all of these knives actually came from all of these knives were knives that have been in my pocket the most over the last couple of months. And the Amalgam gets tons of pocket time. This is one of my favorite Spydercos. Some of the other Spydercos that I've showed on this list, if I was forced to pick, I may get rid of nearly all of them except this one. I really, really like this knife, but this one has one really annoying thing. And guess what? It's not the action, right? I don't mind that this detent is maybe not as stiff as it could be. When I go to deploy the knife, it deploys every time. I never have a problem with it. So that's really not my problem. My problem with this knife is the way they've done the compression lock. Notice how the compression lock sits just a little bit below the scale here. All right. And that it's rounded. So my finger naturally wants to slide off it. If they had just done one thing here, all they needed to do was leave the sharp edge on this knife, and then I wouldn't have an issue. All right. The thing that makes this a problem is I've got to kind of put a bit of pressure to get my finger not to slide off this. I've got to really push down with a little bit of force. And that's my issue. It has the action. Yeah, I wish it had a stiffer detent, but that's not a big deal to me at all with this knife. The big deal is that my finger sometimes wants to slip off that lock bar, and I have to apply so much pressure that if I'm sitting on the couch flipping this knife for a while, the tip of my pointer finger will start to get sore from putting so much pressure to keep it on the lock bar and to disengage the knife. Now, apart from that, this knife is phenomenal, and the feel in hand is second to none. This feels as good as anything that I've shown you here today, even though it's thinner. And so the ergonomics on this knife are a huge win. The blade length is a huge win. The utility, the balance. I love so many things about this knife. Just that one little thing is the way they've done that lock bar. And so I wish they would change it. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon, but nonetheless, there you go. All right, next on the list, the Chavez Ultramar 229, another knife that I love. Now, this is fairly recent acquisition for me, but look at the blade grind on this knife. It is stunning. Look at that. Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous blade grind. And not just it looks awesome, but the performance of this is phenomenal. The hollow grind means this is so thin and slicey, and then we've got a nice heavy tip so that you've got some extra reinforcement there. You're not going to break it. You're not going to have issues. The lock is enjoyable. The only thing is if you get your fingers on this lock bar, you can forget about it. So I'm pushing on the lock bar right now, and I have to push so hard to deploy the knife that it's actually painful. And you see, I can do it. Now, when I'm carrying this, I've kind of gotten in the habit of putting my fingers just on the pocket clip, and from here, boom, feels great. The detent is really, really nice. But if you get your fingers on the lock bar, it is so uncomfortable that it really, really bothers me. So that's one. And again, a knife I absolutely love. One of my favorites. Here's another. This would be, if the Civivi Dogma that we showed at first was my first favorite budget folder, this would be second in line. This is the CJRB Feldspar. There's only, this knife actually has two things that I don't love, okay? The first thing I don't love about this knife is the blade grind. This is ground for toughness. And, a couple of times recently I pulled this knife out to cut up some apples for my kids, and this thing really wants to just split those apples. So had this been a full flat grind instead of a high flat grind as it is, I think it would have been a little bit better. Now again, for EDC purposes, I actually like a thicker grind like that. I enjoy that extra strength and that confidence that it gives me for sure. But it could be just a little thinner. And so, again, it's a knife I love. I flip this thing. I carry it all the time. I have done tons of cutting with this, and it does perform in actual EDC tests. If you're cutting cardboard, if you're opening packages, if you're doing anything outside of, cutting apples or potatoes, it works really, really well. But the odd time when I go to cut something where blade thickness becomes a bit of a problem, this is a knife where you will notice that. Finally, the last knife on my list, the Spyderco Manix 2 Lockback. This, again, such a great knife. And, we talked about the fact that if I had to pick between the Spydercos that I've got here with me now, I don't know. I may end up keeping this one. This is phenomenal. And I really think it's sad that this didn't do better. This is so comfortable in hand. The size is just right. The look of this knife, I adore this knife. It is so well done. The lock is so clean and so precise. Just a huge, huge win. The only thing I don't like about this, and I guess it's typical of lockbacks, although a lot of cold steel lockbacks, I can do it just fine. No matter how hard I try, I cannot flick this knife out. All right, and that's not the end of the world, but here's the reason it kind of bugs me. Look how nicely that drops shut. So the action on this is actually really, really good. It's just the lock interfaces with the tang of the knife in such a way that I cannot flick the knife open. Not the end of the world. I still, again, love this knife. I enjoy the heck out of it, but just got that one little hiccup. So there you go, guys. Those are some knives where I absolutely love the knife, and I'm happy to overlook. And here's the main point of this video. These are not knives that I'm going to sell. These are not knives that I'm complaining about. These are not knives that I would give a negative review. I like and easily recommend every single knife that I've shown you. However, they all have that one little hiccup that I wish was a little bit different. I'd love to hear your comments down below. What knife do you have that's got that one little thing that you wish you could change to make it just absolutely perfect? And do you feel the same way? Or would these little things about a knife bug you so much that you wouldn't be able to keep it? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm going to put a link to DLT Trading. Using that link does help the channel a whole lot. You guys don't realize how beneficial that actually is. And so I'll thank you in advance for doing that. Hopefully, we'll see a few of these knives make minor changes that would make them just perfect. Like I would give an awful lot of money for a Benchmade Freak built just like this, but with a satin blade. Just that would be such a dream knife for me. So there you go, guys. Sorry, I'm digressing and I'm not closing off quickly and easily. I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.